kind of stabilizing. But let's look at this. The knight on h4 is trapped, and Pragg has castled to the same side, and then played g7, g5 on that very same flank. We will see a piece sack by Hikaru, most likely.
Yes, I think that this is usually a typical stuff, but the question is that is somebody mixing things up or not? Because now I'm a little bit confused, and we have to see the camera, we have to see Hikaru's face, that how is he reacting. I know exactly how this line happens, but apparently he did make a move a3, which, because usually black's bishop, I think, goes back to c5 or something. I mean, I have some very vague memories from something like 10 years ago, and I looked at this position.
Was Hikaru tricked? That's the big question. And this started out as a Four Knights English, the same opening that featured in both of their classical games. Of course, in the first game, Hikaru was on the black side of the g3 English. He played knight d4. Pragg plays bishop b4. The knight jumps out to d5, as is very standard. And e4, knight h4. This is a very well-known line. It's a tactical line, but it's well-known by theory. Bishop g2, d6. Castles apparently is one of the main moves, or is castles the mistake? And according to the engine, a3 is the mistake, and apparently the move is d2, d4 after castles. But Peter, my insight in this position is non-existent. I know that this is a line vaguely, but I've never studied it.
Yeah, it has so many different move orders when black plays d6, when he castles, and I do believe that here maybe white was actually supposed to simply take that bishop on b4. Maybe it's possible, or to go a3 here. But Hikaru played castles, and after g5 he opted for a3. But after bishop a5, of course not bishop c5, because then white would run to d4 with a tempo, hit the bishop, and the bishop would be threatening to take the pawn on g5 with a winning pin. But black falls back with the bishop to a5, and now how do we save that piece on h4?
Yeah, so that's what's happening. The knight on h4 is literally trapped. This is a dire concern for Hikaru. Now, obviously, white will have compensation, long-term compensation, based on black's compromised king position. My biggest question would be, what happens if white plays d4 here with the idea of meeting g takes h4 with bishop g5? And I'm answering my own question as I'm asking it. Black plays knight takes d5, c takes d5, and if black's rook were on b8, then everything would work out perfectly. But black has this initial square for his knight. Why knight b8? Because knight e7 is terrible. It blunders the g5 pawn. You need to keep the contact between black's queen and the pawn on g5. And white will lose the knight on h4. Now, what can white get in return? Well, white can pick up the e4 pawn. That's the low-hanging fruit. But Peter, after g takes h4, there is no question, even without the eval bar, that white's compensation here is woefully insufficient. Yes, black is underdeveloped. Yes, the king is weak. But all of these are resolvable problems. And what is white going to do? Hikaru has to exercise those demons and start working on making his way back in this game, which will be a Herculean task, probably the hardest task that Hikaru has faced in this World Cup. He was losing in his first round tiebreaker against Venkataraman, but this seems to be even more objectively lost as he tries the move d3, and we will see, Peter, knight takes d5, cd, and knight b8 for sure.
Yes, it's for sure. The move d3 is of course stronger than d4. It was also Top's engine move. The point being that probably white will be able to capture with the pawn on e4. That's what I'm guessing. Does this give us some more control? But I don't really... I mean, the position is bad anyway. You can get a better version of a losing position, but definitely the question is, how will Hikaru manage to at least set up a position where he can put up a fight, he can put some pressure on his opponent, and that's exactly what he's trying to create.
Piece and does not attain nearly sufficient compensation for it. This is the current position on the board. Pragg's last move, knight d7 to e5, deploying the knight. He is still up a piece. Hikaru still only has, I believe, one pawn for that piece. And man, it does not look like White's got any compensation at all at this point.
Well, actually, if I look at the position, I don't have the feeling White only has one pawn. Yeah, I was pretty sure that White at least has two pawns because of the pawn chain. The pawn on c7 doesn't really make much of an impact at the moment, but it's a very important stabilizing pawn. The bishop also on a5 will beautifully sit on the b6 square protected by the pawn. It also protects the pawn itself. And this lovely knight on e5. Yeah, Hikaru has to play bishop g3, queen h5, and then hope
F4?
for something like f4. Yeah, but where does it lead? I don't see where it leads.
F4 chases the knight. Where does the knight go? Knight g4 is the aggressive, the principled move, and then maybe bishop g2 to f3, trying to create some tension on the king side. Hikaru instead with rook to g1. But now, Peter, after king h8, f4, knight g4, black will be threatening queen takes h2 and knight f2 mate, and that is not just a gimmick. That is actually a problem for White in that position. Things seem to be going from bad to worse here.
Yeah, it's looking very scary for Hikaru. Okay, Hikaru anyway will play then bishop f3, which creates luft for his king, and probably wants to go rook g2, trying to double or do some action on the g file. But black is perfect under control, and he still has 7.5 minutes and has stabilized the position. It looks almost impossible to imagine that Hikaru will create some magic, but still not to be ruled out.
We can stay on this game, but bad news for Vincent Keimer fans. He has made a big mistake almost immediately upon transitioning into that endgame. He has blundered a pawn. Very similar, actually.
Hikaru is in this situation. What does it?
Knight g4. Knight g4,
Knight
and
g4.
White loses everything.
Yeah, because of this beautiful tactic with queen takes h2 threatening.
Oh my gosh, maybe we should show it on the board just in case.
Yes, all eyes on Pragg. So knight g4, e4, queen takes h2 check, bishop takes h2, knight f2 check, mate. That's the very big problem. And no, Pragg missed the chance. He opted for bishop h3. Wow, nerves are involved, but still black is winning.
But knight g4 was a much cleaner move, and that move would have ended the game immediately. This is what you don't want to do against Hikaru. You don't want to start letting it back in the game, because then suddenly you feel like the winning task gets harder and harder. But again, let's not overstate the case. Pragg still wins, but he has to find the move knight g4. That move is involved in every winning attempt here for black. You could play bishop takes g2 check first. You could play knight g4 immediately, but you cannot keep this knight on e5 because it will be targeted by the combined forces of White's rook on f1, the bishop on g3, the queen on c3. They are creating heat and putting the heat on black's king, the f6 pawn, and the e5 knight. And knight g4 solves all of these problems at once. Can Pragg find it on the second attempt?
Well, capture, I mean, there was a trade on g2 first, and knight g4 also threatens, then queen takes d5. Yeah, the pawn on d5 is also hanging. That's another problem. But on the other hand, this knight is such a stabilizer, and it does stop White's queen of getting access to the f6 pawn, and it also blocks the bishop on g3. So I also understand, Pragg, that psychologically it's so difficult to move that knight away. We see that computer screams that it's a winning move, but over the board you might have this tendency of just trying to stabilize as much as you can.
And Pragg, I mean, you can sense the nerves. He seemed to be about to move. He's shaking. He's putting every fiber of his effort into trying to convert this extra piece against Hikaru. More hesitation for Pragg. He's got 3.5 minutes to Hikaru's 13. So the last thing you want to do with black is to start letting White back in the game. If Hikaru can complicate this, he's got black's low time to bank on, but the knight jumps out to g4, the correct move by Pragg. And Hikaru, is he a little surprised? Is he disappointed? And most importantly, how does he stir up complications in this hopeless position?
Yes, it's very tough. The problem is that, I mean, okay, not only that the e3 pawn is falling, but black will also have this queen takes d5 idea pinning the rook on g2, and the bishop on b6 makes sure that white is even not really able to move with that king from h1.
Radoslav Wojtaszek with the white pieces, but also has excellent chances to hold a draw. And final update for now, Wang Hao and Rasmus Vane are also likely to draw their game, although Wang Hao has minor winning chances in a theoretically drawn endgame.
Yeah, Pragg, after d6, I believe he just captured on d6. Yes,
why not?
C takes d6. Yeah, it hurts, yeah, because the queen d5 idea is still there. Black also gets the e6 square now for just stabilizing the position even more with rook e6, making sure that the pawn on f6 will be double defended. It's always a very nice feeling when you know that everything is super safe.
And Hikaru just disgusted with the way that this has gone. He might play bishop takes d6, trying to set up some check on c4 maybe. At least I would consider that move, but not sure what Black's cleanest response is to bishop takes d6. It's definitely not rook takes c3, because that would in fact blunder the fork on c4.
Yes, this is what Hikaru is putting his hopes on, that eventually somewhere queen c4 check targets the knight on g4, especially if the bishop moves. But my concern is that after bishop takes d6, Black will simply play the move rook e6, or also rook ac8.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, all these moves are very natural. Hikaru was about to make a move, but not yet.
Yeah, and he knows full well the hopelessness of the situation, but this is not a resignable position in a rapid game. You have to exhaust every last opportunity, and we're so used to Hikaru coming back that you almost start believing that there are chances to be found, but in this position, there are no chances to be found. That's just a full extra piece. White's position is collapsing on all sides. You're going to lose e3, and you don't have a single piece to attack. Knight takes e3. Knight takes e3 might end the game here, because queen d7 check is met with rook e7, and I think Pragg is going to pause here for a couple moments and calculate this line, because if you calculate it accurately, you end the game immediately.
Yes, but at the same time, you let Hikaru sacrifice his rook on f6 with a check.
Yep.
And after king f6, rook f2 check, it's so easy to see some goes there.
Oh, absolutely. Queen d7, rook f6, rook f2, bishop h4 could be thrown in at the end of that line, and you need nerves of steel to go for it. But knowing Pragg, he pins a lot of his hopes on his own calculation, and he found a great alternative. He drives the rook down to e4, forcing the queen back to its initial square, and perhaps he will deploy the other rook over to e8 or maybe to g8 and solidify the knight even further.
Yes, and basically Black is already a piece and the pawn up, has perfect coordination. All his pieces have joined the battle.
Whoa. I'm also checking out Magnus's game. Magnus has apparently let the win slip, and on his last seconds, Vincent is fighting tooth and nail, trying to make that draw. He's generated potentially game-saving counterplay. I don't know which game we should look at. They're both so interesting as Pragg captures the bishop, the pawn on e3.
Well, here basically the game itself is already not interesting, because Pragg is clearly winning. The interest is that Hikaru is in a hopeless situation and how he fights, and if Pragg will able to handle the situation, I believe yes. I mean, A4. Look at this. He can do whatever he wants, and Hikaru doesn't know what to do.
He has no moves. A4 by Hikaru, just giving Pragg the move. And Pragg says, thank you. I'm going to deploy my rook. I'm going to put it on e8. And queen b3, last attempts here by Hikaru. But b7 is neither here nor there. You can give that pawn up. You can play bishop e3 back to d4 in order to vacate that parking spot for the knight. The only small concern is Pragg's clock situation. He cannot let it get, let's say, under 30 seconds. But he's not going to.
Yeah, in this position, there is just no reason to do that. No threats. Hikaru can throw in the tower any minute, any second.
And he might resign in this position. This is how bad it is. I think we have to go back to the Magnus game, but we have to also see the handshake. So let's wait a couple more moments here. I'm also seeing the Magnus game. I'm keeping an eye on it. But Hikaru continues to try. He continues to squeeze his way through with his queen. Is there anything to be found? Is there a miracle waiting for Hikaru in this game? I don't think that the miracle will be found this time in Baku. That's it. There's the handshake.